Greetings everyone. As you can see, I'm here in Borderlands 2, a game that I love so much, no less than anyone else who has played it. And a game that has taken a considerable amount of my time over the years. Most of my time actually was put into the PC version of this game, which I don't have access to at the moment. So I was forced to play the latest DLC and say goodbye to the era of Borderlands 2 here on console. Which is why I'm still here on True Vault Hunter mode actually, and not Ultimate Vault Hunter mode. But I will get to that later on. Even though, like I said, this game has taken a lot of my time and I love it no less than anyone else, and I'm cautiously excited and waiting for Borderlands 3 to release a few days from now. I say cautiously because what I remember most about Borderlands 2 actually, of course, it's like the good times, the good stuff, all the awesome experience the game has to offer, but also a lot of the issues that plagued Borderlands 2 and all of the things surrounding it. By that I mean the Borderlands 2, its DLCs, the pre-sequel, the updates it got, all the era of Borderlands 2. And in these series of videos that I'm going to release hopefully before the release of Borderlands 3, of course within a few days, I'm going to be going over these issues that I found very well, they vary in the degrees of which I found them to be annoying, and in some cases flat out hindered my experience with the game. There are things that I really wish Borderlands 3 would fix. I don't expect all of them to get fixed, not even close. But nonetheless, I wanted to voice my opinion regarding this game and the issues it had in my mind before Borderlands 3 is out. First of all, I'd like to say that there are, of course, general problems with all RPG games, and Borderlands 2 is no exception. RPG games tend to focus on scale more than anything else. They want to give you this vast, enormous open world and just try constantly, even in their promotional material, going over how vast the game is, going over numbers, going over, you know, like in Borderlands' case, bazillion guns, even though that's not technically true. So they tend to focus on scale, and because of that, they kind of like build a core system, and attention to details is lost. Now, of course, you can point out very small minor details, you can point out textures, you can point out stuff, but these issues kind of like pile up. For example, you could see that this gun right here that I have has a vertical grip, and even though it has that grip, when your character holds it, it goes through their hand because they don't alter the way they hold the gun based on the vertical grip. So they like, you'd see this theme recurring where they have this kind of general system that applies to everything without revisiting. Like, they don't revisit things and say, how does this change now that we introduced that? And you'd find that generally while walking around in the world. You'd encounter invisible walls, you'd encounter jumps you can make, you encounter like weird behavior like this thing that I'm experiencing right now, and so on and so forth. But again, that is something that plagues all RPG games. Because of their massive scale, they can't keep up, and development time, no matter how long, is not going to be enough to iron out all the tiny details and make everything make perfect sense. So that's sad. You can also sense that because of that, you'd find a lot of areas where that serve absolutely no purpose. You'd find a lot of areas where there's no reason ever to come back to them, and they just, again, serve no purpose whatsoever. They're empty, they don't contain anything worth revisiting. You'd find that generally these games try to focus more on atmosphere than they do on, again, details. For example, this area right here in the newest DLC, or the latest DLC I should say, really conveys a lot of feeling, like, again, atmosphere, general sensation. You know, the music plays a huge part in it, the lighting, the graphics, of course, the design, the concept, the baggage that the area brings with it, the sight of the Helios crashed station, and all of that. So that is what these games do exceptionally well. But in a way, RPG games in general, and this of course applies to Borderlands by extension, they kind of like make sense only halfway through. Like the second you start extending your expectation from the game beyond a certain point, things start falling apart, and like the bare bones of the game start showing. You're constantly reminded that this game was designed by people who are flawed and they didn't pay attention to stuff. And so playing an RPG game in many cases relies a lot on you yourself ironing out and kind of like making sense of the game on your own. You kind of like have to utilize exploits more than you do with other single player, like completely linear types of games. So when they craft things on such a huge scale, they just, again, they make sense only up to a certain degree. And I will get to things like these in more detail later on in further videos, but for example, the way you have to like quit continue in order to farm bosses really doesn't make any sense. You could have just like quit the area and come back. But like the game requiring you to quit continue to fight something again, or to farm, it really, again, like you'd have to like constantly be breaking the fourth wall. You'd have to constantly be reminded that you're in a game, which is kind of like the opposite of what these games are supposed to be. They're supposed to be very immersive because, like I said, they focus on atmosphere and giving you a certain like fiction to drown yourself into. But at the same time, you're constantly reminded that this is a game and was designed, again, deeply flawed. And the developers didn't have time to pay attention to this. Oh, this is an oversight. This kind of like only makes sense because it's a game. So that I've always found that to be kind of like a weird thing to do. Like, again, you through the use of exploits, you can pretty much do everything in the game, but they didn't. It's kind of like difficult to know whether or not they wanted these things to happen. For example, you can only have up to 39, almost 40 items you can carry. But if you accept a mission, reward that is a gun or something, it is added on top of that, and you could use that extra space, extra fastidious space, sort of, to really carry far much more than 39. Your bank only holds 24 items, but you can make mule characters that carry stuff for you. So again, like it's really a contradicting message what the game wants you to be, what the game wants you to experience. And again, this applies not only to Borderlands, but almost all RPG games. The final thing I want the final point I want to make when it comes to that specific point is the way that RPG games kind of like require you to constantly keep reading up on them. Like if you don't read up on the game, you'd end up missing quite a lot. Like for example, mission rewards in Borderlands 2, when you have two options of where to turn in. Sometimes you'd find yourself, for example, one of the notorious examples of this for me is the mission where you have to retrieve Marcus's safe from Sanctuary Hole, and you can turn it either into Moxie or to Marcus. And during your first playthrough, and even during later playthroughs, if you're not mindful, you can wind up turning it to Marcus and getting a ridiculously stupid relic instead of one of the pretty much better shotguns of the game, which is Moxie's Heartbreaker. So with that out of the way, Like I said, these are problems that plague pretty much all RPG games. You have to like make sense of them yourself. You have to constantly keep intervening. You have to, again, break the fourth wall constantly, even though the game is supposed to be extremely immersive and kind of like drown you in this fantasy. And so, with that, I'm going to transition over to my next point. So, the next thing that I kind of didn't like about Borderlands, specifically Borderlands 2, maybe this even carries back all the way to Borderlands 1, but it's the way that the story is structured. You'd find a general theme in Borderlands games where, specifically with Borderlands 2 going forward, that the plot kind of like only makes sense, again, only halfway through. Like, the plot is constantly like being built up. They keep tying these knots, and you expect a great resolution to this, and it doesn't really happen. The way it goes is you generally find that the plot they keep building up kind of like falls apart, and they, in a way, like try to escape from with hasty writing. They're like, okay, game has to end now. This thing is not really important. This kind of like resolved by itself, and this we are going to conveniently ignore. So by that I mean, for example, like the Wilhelm situation that we got in Borderlands 2. Wilhelm is being built up to be this immense badass, and then he turns out to be nothing. You'd find stuff along the lines of like, oh, the warrior, and then the solution is Jack spawns the warrior and you just kill him easily. You'd find the greatest, of course, example of this is going to be something I'll address in a minute, which is like the Roland situation, the way he died. But even with this DLC, you'd find like a quick kind of like cop-out. Okay, we have this dull commander that was like dormant for all this time, and all of a sudden he decided to attack. We're going to give him a backstory. So instead of utilizing characters that are already established and built, they always choose to go down the route of inventing new characters and coming up with new stuff, which doesn't really hold up well. Pre-sequel is kind of a major example of this, because if you remember, the game was being hyped up to kind of like convey that this is the way that Handsome Jack transformed into a villain. You'd find this very theme repeated throughout the very first missions of the game, where Athena calls him a hero. She said, I don't know and I don't care what the Handsome Jack that you met was like. The Jack I meant was a hero. Jack I met was a hero. And as you progress through the game, it turns out that he wasn't. Like, he was a monster all along. He always used his daughter Angel. It turns out he had used the Eye of the Destroyer right from the beginning. No certain event kind of like triggered him to go evil. It's just that when the Vault Hunters, along with Moxie, betray him for already being a bad guy, that he kind of like becomes, just like drops the charade and becomes a flat-out, full-on bad guy. So it doesn't like live up to the premise. It doesn't live up to what the game was supposed to be saying, that this is the way that Handsome Jack transformed into villainry. And this applies to, again, everything. You'd find these big build-ups that don't really amount to anything by the end. And I really suggest that more attention should be paid to the writing in Borderlands games, because I'm constantly reminded of this, that no matter how great the plot feels when you're halfway through the game, it always falls apart and is kind of like, again, concluded in bad taste and half-assed writing. The main example of this, to me, is the Roland death situation, which is kind of like the worst thing about Borderlands 2, not because characters can't die or something, but because of the way it was handled. Like, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this entire mission, by the way, and this has been highlighted by others, makes no sense. Roland tells you that you have to get to Angel's Core, and to do that you'd have to, again, like, go through the Wildlife Exploitation Preserve to get the Claptrap upgrade. You have to get Brick's help to get past the bunker. You'd have to get Handsome Jack's voice modulator to get through the door, but all of that is bypassed by Roland himself when he climbs alongside of the cliff. And once you're inside Control Core Angel, Roland, who has not gained a voice modulator for Handsome Jack, who did not require to go down the same route that you went down in order to, like, have Brick's buzzards assist you or whatnot, he kind of winds up inside Control Core Angel, so what gives? And then Handsome Jack, he's like sending bots at you, and he's asking you not to kill his daughter, which is actually a very kind of like sentimental and emotional moment. And only after Angel is dead that he comes down, and you assume that he's a coward because he only decided to intervene at the very last minute, but it turns out that he's actually very capable, that he just like flat out kills Roland with a single shot. Roland, who survived Cromerax, who survived General Knox, who survived all of Borderlands 1 and the majority of Borderlands 2, is just killed by one shot with absolutely no explanation. So you're thinking that, oh my god, this Handsome Jack guy is extremely dangerous. He enslaves Lilith, he does everything, and then you fight him and he's not that challenging at all. So again, like, the plot only makes half sense. You have to, like, a lot of it is, again, role-playing. You have to keep pretending that the plot makes sense. And the way Roland's death was handled was in extremely poor taste, because he didn't, like, die protecting the other Vault Hunters, kind of like passing on the torch. He didn't die by choice. He was just, like, bested. Like, I don't understand how they came to that decision at Gearbox, and they say, okay, let's kill Roland in this extremely poor taste and bad manners way. And if I were a dedicated, like, Roland fan from the first Borderlands game, I wouldn't have taken that very kindly at all. I still don't take it kindly, even though I didn't play Roland. But ever since then, you'd find that Gearbox has kind of, like, developed a taste for killing off characters. The pre-sequel, I believe, recently we find out that Timothy is kind of, like, still alive. But 2 out of the 4 Vault Hunters you play as are already dead. So they kind of like developed this taste of, yeah, our story is super corny, it doesn't make much sense, but we're going to pretend that it's serious by killing off characters. And I don't find that to be very good. Especially with the way, like, the pre-sequel, like, even Scooter's death in TPS was, not TPS, sorry, in Tales from the Borderlands, was done in much better fashion. He kind of like died in a way that suits him, so to speak. But it's kind of like worries me going forward. What is going to come of the other characters that are alive in Borderlands 3? How are they going to get killed off? Are they going to get killed in a similar tasteless fashion? Do they really need to die? And that kind of like concerns me. So with that, I'm going to transition over to my next point. And the final point I'm going to make for this video is the way DLC and like bonus content and additional content was handled. A lot of the DLCs are actually pretty good. You find something along the lines of Captain Scarlet and her pirate's booty, which is fantastic. It has a lot of, again, like I said, atmosphere. It could very much be my favorite DLC of the game, or DLC pack, where like the music is perfect fit, even though like a lot of it is recycled, but the areas, I believe Wormwater has a unique soundtrack alongside with Magnus Lighthouse. And again, the atmosphere is fantastic. You find these huge ass ships that are just like floating on these rocks because this used to be a sea and it has receded, an idea that was first explored, I believe, in General Knox DLC for Borderlands 1, and they capitalized on it. and it's fantastic. It looks very good. You have new weapons, like the Pimpernel here, fantastic weapon. Sandhawk, which a lot of people, of course, use and are very, very familiar with. And this is an example of a good DLC. You got raid bosses, you got stuff to do. But then you have a lot of kind of like stinkers. For example, the entirety of the Ultimate Vault Hunter mode, that upgrade pack, it was basically a DLC that required absolutely no work from Gearbox. No work. They just cranked up a bunch of numbers, and this is going to be a thing I'm going to return back to, and they didn't pay much attention to how that affected things. They just like, okay, enemies have quadruple health, you now have more skills, and that's it. Without, again, paying attention to the aftermath of such decisions. And so that was a huge cash grab. The raid on Digistruct Peak was extremely similar. They created one single area that didn't require that much work from them. All the enemies, almost all the enemies, are completely recycled. They gave you a bunch of weapons, most of which don't work, and they designed this mode that I'm going to dedicate an entire video to Ultimate Vault Hunter mode and the OP levels and how they were handled. But DLC in general, like, it was a lot of hit and miss. And I hate these examples of, like I said, Ultimate Vault Hunter mode or whatever, a DLC that requires no work from Gearbox, renders all your gear obsolete in a blink of an eye. Like, people played with level 50 gear for ages, they farmed that gear for hours, and all of a sudden it's made completely useless by the by the flip of a switch, because suddenly the maximum level is level 72. And then OP8, and all your gear is obsolete once again. And then they release the latest DLC, and again, all your gear is obsolete, and you have to farm everything again, and that's not an easy task. So, and of course, and a lot of the DLCs actually had horrible enemy design. For that, I cite, of course, again, Headhunter packs, a prime example of horrible DLC. Horrible. You could skip all of the Headhunter packs and not really feel that you missed much. Maybe only Wambam Island or the Son of Cromarax warrants kind of like a visit, but the rest is really not worth it at all. You don't get anything new aside from one single map, and only here do you get like a new raid boss, stuff to do, actually good loot, but for the rest of them it's actually not that exciting. Actually, the example I want to cite when it comes to how they don't really think their designs through is Tiny Tina and and Dragon Keep, because they designed these enemies, they designed them to be unique, because like in all the other DLCs, the enemies were pretty much reskins. Not all of them. Hammerlock had Scalians and Tribesmen, which were kind of unique, and Spores. But for most for the Pirate Booty and Tor's Campaign of Carnage, the enemies were pretty much reskins. Very few new enemies, if any. And when it came to Dragon Keep, the enemies are completely unique, but they really like missed the mark with these. Like, for example, okay, fine, spiders are basically flesh enemies and they're weak to fire, but when it comes to skeletons and whatever, they kind of like have these red life bars, but they're not weak to fire, they're actually resistant to fire, they're resistant to everything. And then you'd have these blue skeletons, which I believe you're far better off using explosive, and at least they don't resist corrosive damage. But then you have these like brittle skeletons, whatever, that are like resistant to pretty much everything except melee, I don't know. You have Scalians in Hammerlock DLC, which are like resistant to non-elemental damage, which is weird. And they're even resistant to melee. So the DLC was not perfectly well handled. And I'm going to elaborate on that when it comes to Ultimate Vault Hunter mode specifically, and the way overpower levels and further leveling was handled in the game, and how it ties into farming and pretty much all that Borderlands is about. So this has been my first video. I'm going to continue this. Oh, such an asshole going with it. I am, no doubt, because Borderlands is quite vast and I have a lot of ideas, I would not be surprised if I missed a few points and I made like a follow-up video to summarize points I kind of like forgot to cite in their correct location. But until then, of course, this area is very, very lovely. Love making my ways through these trapdoors. And so I'll see you all in the next one with more bitching about Borderlands 2 and hoping Borderlands 3 is better. So until then, bye-bye.